Hi everybody, this is Cameron again, and this is my presentation for the week on IMAP and DNS. What is IMAP, you might be asking? IMAP is an acronym that stands for Internet Message Protocol. It allows you to access your emails from wherever or whenever you are. When you read your emails using IMAP, that means you're reading it directly off the server, right? Because of this, you can check your emails wherever and whenever you would like without missing anything. So because you're reading it directly off of this server, you basically get immediate access to your email at any time of the day, and it's usually going to be the most up-to-date. It works as an intermediary between the email client and the email server. So this means that IMAP works as a mediator between the two. It supports functional communication between the email client and the email server. So basically, it's going to essentially help to promote a healthy communication between the two servers, so that way your emails can show up on time and also show up wherever you'd like to look them up, whether it be on your mobile device or on a computer, on a tablet, and so on and so forth. It's also become the internet standard, which means most often that you will find the most of your common webmail services associated with this protocol. So I'm actually going to go over in the next slide, and we're going to talk a little bit more about webmail services. Felt like this next slide is going to be really important. It's really important to really understanding what the differences are between IMAP, POP3, etc., and why they are going to be helpful. So, webmail versus your email client. If you've ever used either of these, you more than likely have utilized both of these options and didn't realize it. However, there are several different pros and cons related to using either one of these options. So if you use Gmail, Hotmail, Yahoo, AOL, any of the online email services, Outlook, you're more than likely have used a webmail services. That means that you will go to a web browser, type in the email website or host site, and then you will access your emails via the website. And then if you've ever used like the Microsoft Outlook app, not physically Outlook itself, the application that comes standard on Windows 10, the Apple Mail application that comes standard on Mac OS, or Mozilla Thunderbird, which is kind of old. It's not very often used anymore, but in my research I found that this was something else that was also a really popular email client. So what this means that you can use the email client to access your web emails from the server. So basically it works as a host, and it pulls your emails from the IMAP server itself and downloads them to the email client, right? So you can do this because the email client, again, like I said, will download your emails from the server so that you can download, read, access, and delete your emails that way. So that's going to be the major differences between the two. One is just hosting the email server via Gmail, Hotmail, Yahoo, whatever, Outlook, while the other is going to be a direct link or access to it, which, like I said, you can use Google. Hotmail is now obsolete to a certain extent. It's now associated with Outlook, but you'll find often that people still use Hotmail. Yahoo Mail is so associated with Yahoo. AOL, again, is another email that's not popular. You also have things like bellsouth.net. That was one that was used pretty frequently as well. So I also wanted to include how to install the IMAP. So you're going to use the sudo apt install certbot. That's going to be what you're going to use when you're setting up your desktop email client. You're enabling some sort of encryption, so that way it makes it essentially safe. It's always going to be the safe idea to allow you to enable some sort of encryption. This will also help you obtain your free TLS certificate. So the next thing is what you're going to do to secure your TLS server traffic with the certificate. So obviously, as we've done before, you're going to go in, you're going to use this particular command, and it is associated with Apache, as you can see. And then once you do this, you can use the second command to begin obtaining the TLS cert. After typing this command, you will copy the text into the file, the text listed at the bottom, where I put use this text in the file, and save and exit, and you should be good to go as far as having the TLS file set up. So the next thing is, what is DNS? So DNS is an acronym for Domain Name Server or Domain Name System. I've actually seen both of them throughout my research. I decided to put both of them because I did see both of them pretty often. So the DNS is considered the phone book of the internet. Computers can only communicate using a series of numbers, so DNS was developed as something like a phone book for the internet to help translate or find the particular IP addresses, which in the next bullet point you'll notice that I put DNS translates domain names to IP addresses so browsers can load internet resources. So essentially that's what I was saying. Again, it allows the computer to take those words and translate them into numbers, aka the IP address, so that way the computer can understand and respond to the client request. They also contain zone files. So a zone file is a plain text file stored in a DNS server that contains an actual representation of a zone, or a data location, so where we're going to go to obtain the data. So there are 4 DNS servers involved in loading a web page. So I thought this slide was particularly important because it's going to go through and kind of explain the 4 things that build the DNS server. So you have the DNS recursor, the root name server, the TLD name server, and the authoritative name server. So the DNS recursor, this server is a server that is responsible for retaining the requests from the client. So it's responsible for holding the request that we make as the user to the server to access our emails. So then the root server is essentially the first step in translating the IP address into the host name and vice versa. So they'll work back and forth. So it'll change the host name to the IP address so that way the server can understand it, and then, the other way around. Change the IP address to the host name so that way that's what we see when we're using our browser. So the TLD name server is a little complicated, but it is cool. So it's the top level domain server is the next step in how DNS finds the host name of the site and hosts the last part of the site. So basically after it converts into the IP address, not the host site or the web browser, then it's hosted at the end with a .com, .org, .edu, .net, etc. So essentially the TLD name server will take the name and add a host at the end, which those hosts are going to be, again, .com, .org, .edu, .net, or whatever else you might be familiar with. And then the authoritative name server, this means that after everything has been successfully converted to the IP address, you can successfully send the web browser name back to the DNS server, and the DNS server then can successfully respond back to the client. So essentially it's kind of like a loop. The DNS server is going to be used twice, so it's kind of like ask and answer at this point. And these are the steps, the root name server, the TLD, and the authoritative name server, that those are the steps that it's going to take, obviously, to answer the DNS server or client request. So I included a slide on setting up DNS on Windows using ISS. So these are just some steps that I found that I thought would be nice. So the first thing you'll do is open the server manager and add roles and features. And that's kind of what we did, similar to when we installed the ISS. After you open the server manager, you will select role-based installation and select server to install DNS. Once you follow those steps, you can proceed normally. So after that, you'll confirm and install that that's what you want to install. You'll wait for the software to install, and then you can close it and configure how you'd like in adding your zones and records and whatnot to it. So what is Bind? Bind is going to be a software that we're going to be using with Ubuntu to install DNS. Bind stands for Berkeley Internet Name Domain. It's also referred to as bind 9, really commonly seen on the internet. I also included a picture of the logo on the left hand side of the screen here of what that would look like. Bind is an open source implementation of DNS, so it's essentially kind of like putting a brand to a server. So they took a server, put a brand to it, and then it's obviously one of the most popular domain name systems that's being used today. Bind can be used to run DNS server or an authoritative server and provides features like load balancing, notify, dynamic updates, split DNS, etc. It also consists of 3 server parts: the name server, the lightweight resolver, and the name server tools. It also, there are a couple of advantages of using Bind as well. It's stable, which that means it's used across the world by millions, and it is known for how stable it is during operations and how well it functions. It also has a good platform support, meaning it supports a wide array of operating systems like Linux, Windows, Mac OS, etc. So those are a couple of things that I thought were really cool advantages about Bind. So this slide here is installing DNS using Bind. So you will use the first command, the sudo apt get install -y bind 9 would be how you would install the Bind server. The second command in particular is used to check and confirm your configuration file for Bind. So you will use that after you configure the Bind file. Once you do that, you want to make sure that you check your zones here as well. And then how to run, the last 2 commands essentially are going to be how to run Bind. So, or enable or restart it after you make changes. So you have the sudo systemctl enable bind 9 and sudo systemctl restart bind 9. So those are the 2 commands you'll use to enable, obviously to enable the server, and you'll use a restart after you make any updates to the server, so that way you can enable it again and check and make sure your configurations went through. And then I have some of Bind's top 3 best practices. It's a short slide, but these are the most important ones. So the first one is choose appropriate software and hardware. This means that you ensure that you run the currently supported versions of Bind on your system at all times, so that you don't run the risk of having several issues with the system. That also includes making sure your OS or whatever you're using to support Bind is up to date. The second thing is prevent external access to internal data by design. That's another thing that they do. That Bind has a default in the system as a good practice. And then it says take the basic security measures. So this problem usually occurs when we're referring to that is like an accidental leak of data that is internal only, or external clients expecting internal view gets external view. And then the second thing is usually associated with the VPN failure. So you'll have to help prevent that. You'll make use of Bind access control mechanisms such as match lists to help restrict recursive query. And then these practices obviously will be considered Bind's top 3 practices here. So, and then again, the last page includes all of the sources that I use to find this information. The last link is really important because that is where I got the information from about the top 3 best practices for Bind. Thank you.